This story is told like a real experience. Some details have been slightly changed for privacy and storytelling purposes. However, the events you're about to hear are presented the way they were described. What happened out there, in those woods, is something I still have trouble explaining. And even now, the part that bothers me most is how normal it all sounded at first. Not loud, not violent, just wrong, in a way that took me too long to understand. The first night in the cabin, someone knocked on the door. The second night, I saw them standing between the trees. The third night, they said my name, and by the time I finally got out of those woods, I realized the people outside hadn't just found the cabin by accident. They had been watching it, watching me, learning my routine. And the worst part is, I don't think they started the night I got there. I think they already knew someone was coming. Before we get into it, if you enjoy realistic horror stories, isolated cabin encounters, and the kind of true-style stories that stay with you long after they end, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. And if you want to help support the channel and help more people find stories like this, leave a like on the video. It genuinely helps, more than most people realize. Now, let's get into the story, because what happened in that cabin still doesn't feel real to me. A few years ago, I borrowed a cabin from a friend's uncle in northern Idaho. I'd been burning out for months and needed a few days where nobody could reach me. No calls, no traffic, no work emails, no apartment noise at 2 a.m. Just silence, trees, and a place far enough out that I could disappear for a little while. That was the pitch. My friend gave me a key, a paper map, and one sentence that felt strange enough to remember. He said, "If you hear something outside at night, don't go looking for it." Then he laughed. I laughed too. The drive out there took almost 5 hours. The last stretch was nothing but dirt, deep ruts, loose rock, and dense pine on both sides. The farther I drove, the darker it got beneath the trees, even though the sun hadn't gone down yet. By the time I reached the clearing where the cabin sat, I already had that feeling you get in remote places, where the silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like you've stepped into a place that doesn't care whether you leave or not. That should have been enough to turn around, but I didn't. I kept driving, straight into it. The cabin itself was small. One main room, a wood stove, a tiny kitchen, a narrow bathroom, and a loft with a mattress under the sloped roof. There was a porch in front, one window over the sink, 2 in the front room, and 1 on the side, beside the bed. That side window ended up mattering more than anything else. There were no neighboring cabins, no lights in the distance, no road noise, nothing except trees, wind, and the occasional creak of old wood settling in the cold. Inside, the place smelled like dust, damp boards, and age. Not abandoned, just old enough to feel forgotten. I unpacked, stacked the groceries, checked the lanterns, and made dinner while the last daylight faded outside. By 7, the woods beyond the clearing were already black. That first night, I understood how different silence sounds when there's truly nothing around you. In a city, silence always has something under it. A car, a siren, a voice, a wall creaking in another apartment. Out there were moments when everything stopped so completely that even swallowing sounded loud. I remember standing near the front window with a mug of coffee, trying to see past my reflection in the glass. and realizing I could only see the porch rail and the first line of trees. After that, nothing. I slept badly that first night, but told myself it was only because I wasn't used to the place. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to something moving outside. It wasn't close enough to be at the wall. It sounded farther out, near the edge of the clearing. Slow footsteps on leaves. 1, 2, pause, then 3 more. Not quick, not random, just pacing. I stayed still and listened, waiting for it to get closer. After maybe 20 seconds, it stopped, and when the silence came back, it somehow felt worse than the footsteps. By morning, I almost felt stupid for being unsettled. Daylight has a way of making fear look embarrassing. The cabin looked harmless in the sun. The clearing felt smaller. The trees just looked like trees. I walked around the property with my coffee and found some tracks near the back, probably deer. That was enough to calm me down. The whole day passed normally. I drove to the lake, came back, cooked dinner, read for a while, and told myself the first night had been nothing. But once the sun dropped again, the woods went black so fast, it felt like the dark had been waiting for me to notice it. Around 10:30 that second night, I heard 3 knocks on the cabin door. Not pounding, not desperate. Just 3 slow, measured knocks. I froze instantly. For a second, I honestly thought I imagined it. Then I heard them again. 3 more. Slow, evenly spaced. I looked at my phone. No signal. 10:34 p.m. I sat there staring at the door, waiting for a voice. A hello. A sorry. My car broke down. Something normal. Nothing came. That silence on the other side of the door was the first moment I realized whoever was outside wasn't there by accident. I got up without turning on any extra lights and moved toward the front window. Then I stopped, because a thought hit me out of nowhere. What if somebody was standing right there, on the other side, waiting to see the curtain move? That thought made my skin crawl so badly. I backed away from the front window and moved to the side one instead. From there, I could look across part of the porch without putting my face directly in front of the glass. The porch was empty. The steps were empty. The clearing looked empty too. I was starting to think I'd scared myself for nothing, when something moved, just at the edge of my view. A person, just for a second. A dark shape stepping past the front corner of the cabin and disappearing along the side wall. I jerked back so hard. I hit the counter. Then I heard it. A slow drag against the outside wood. Not scratching, not pounding. More like somebody walking with the backs of their fingers, lightly brushing along the siding. The sound moved from the front corner, past the side window, toward the back of the cabin. Soft, deliberate, almost gentle. And there's something about gentleness in the wrong moment that feels more threatening than violence. I didn't sleep much that night. I just listened until morning. By sunrise, I'd already decided I would leave the next day, if anything happened again. Still, I went outside to look around. That's when I found the footprints in the mud beside the porch. Human boot prints, deep enough to tell they'd been standing there for a while. And what bothered me most was where they came from. Not the road, not the clearing, the woods. If someone's car had broken down, they wouldn't be walking out of the trees. If someone was lost, they would have called out. These tracks came straight from the darkness, like whoever made them already knew exactly where the cabin was. I followed the tree line until the tracks vanished into pine needles and rock. Then I noticed something else. Behind the cabin, near the side window, the ground was churned up in one small area, not like somebody had walked by, like somebody had stood there. The mud was compressed over and over in the same spot, with overlapping boot edges pressed into it. Whoever had been outside hadn't just passed the window. They had waited there, watching it, watching me. That was the point where I should have gotten in the truck and left. Instead, I stayed one more day, and I still think about that decision. Why did I stay? Pride. Probably. And the same stupid instinct people always have when something genuinely bad is happening. They start looking for the version of events that makes them feel least foolish. I told myself it was one person messing around. Maybe a hunter. Maybe a local who knew the cabin was occupied. Maybe somebody with too much time on his hands, who thought it was funny. But by the third night, none of that made sense anymore. It was colder than the first 2 nights. The kind of cold that makes the walls tick and the glass tighten in the frames. I kept the stove going, opened my book, and kept pretending I wasn't listening for the woods. At 11:18 p.m., I heard a whistle from somewhere in the trees behind the cabin, low, short. Then another whistle answered it, from farther off to the left. My whole body went cold. That wasn't one person. I stood up so fast, I knocked my chair back. For the next few seconds, there was total silence. Then I heard something moving through the brush behind the cabin. Slow, unhurried. More than one set of steps, spaced just far enough apart that I couldn't count them. That's when I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the flashlight. Because for the first time, I understood I wasn't being watched by one person. That was when someone knocked on the front door again, 3 times. I don't know what made me speak, but I did. I said, "Who's there?" For a few seconds, there was no answer. Then a man's voice, right outside the door, said quietly, "I know you're awake." I have never felt fear hit me that hard, that fast, in my life. It wasn't just that somebody was outside. It was the way he said it. Calm, patient, like we were already in the middle of a conversation. I backed away from the door without making a sound. Then he spoke again. You turned the page 3 times and stopped. At first, I didn't even understand what he meant. Then I looked at the open book on the table. I had reread the same paragraph, over and over. He knew, because he had been watching me through the window. That realization hit so hard. I almost dropped the flashlight. I killed the lamp, throwing the cabin into near darkness, except for the stove glow. I crouched low beneath the front window and moved toward the side of the room. The voice outside didn't rise. He kept talking in the same quiet, almost friendly tone. You don't have to do that. Then, somewhere near the side wall, another voice laughed softly, not because anything was funny, because somebody was enjoying how afraid I was. I made it to the side window and looked through the smallest gap in the curtain. At first, all I saw was darkness and tree trunks. Then I saw him, a man standing halfway behind a tree, maybe 30 feet from the cabin, one shoulder exposed, part of his face visible. He wasn't looking at the woods, he was looking directly at my window, at me, and he was smiling. Not wide, not wild, just a small, calm smile that made him look more certain than angry. Then I moved back from the curtain, and something tapped lightly on the glass, inches from my face. not a knock. A fingernail. One slow tap. Then another. There was someone else standing right outside the side window. I stumbled backward, nearly fell, and listened as the nail traced slowly across the pane, like somebody was feeling around in the dark. Then a whisper came through the glass. Wrong window. I still don't know why that sentence was worse than everything else. Maybe because it meant they were coordinated. Maybe because it sounded casual, like this wasn't the first time they'd done something like this. I went for the truck keys and made it halfway to the door before footsteps hit the porch. Heavy, quick, sudden. Then the doorknob turned. Once, twice, slowly. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife I could find, and my hand was shaking so badly. The blade rattled against the counter. Then I heard something above me, a creak, then another, directly overhead. Somebody was on the roof. You could hear the weight shift across the old boards. Slow steps, one after another. They moved toward the loft, where the roof sloped lowest, and stopped directly over the bed. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying doors and windows, they were checking the structure, looking for a way in. I backed into the corner near the stove and stood there barely breathing. Then, from the side wall beside the bed, a voice whispered, "Come look." Another voice, farther back in the woods, answered with a short whistle. The one on the roof moved again. And right there, in that moment, I understood something with complete certainty. If I stayed, I was going to die in that cabin. Not maybe, not probably. I was. The only question was whether I'd die inside it or outside it. So I killed the stove light as much as I could, grabbed my keys, and waited for the smallest opening. I don't know how long I waited. Maybe a minute, maybe 5. Then, from the far back side of the cabin, something crashed loudly in the brush. At the same time, the person on the roof shifted, and the footsteps on the porch moved. Something about that movement told me. They thought I was still frozen inside. That was the only chance I got. I yanked the front door open and ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I sprinted across the mud toward the truck so fast, I nearly lost my footing. Behind me, somebody shouted. First just a yell, then actual words. "He's out!" And suddenly, multiple footsteps exploded behind me. I got to the truck, fumbled the key so badly it fell once, then threw myself inside, locked the door, and started the engine. Something slammed into the side of the truck hard enough to rock it. Then another hit near the bed. A shape crossed through the headlights. Too fast to see clearly. I hit the gas anyway. The truck lurched forward, skidded, caught traction, and tore across the clearing toward the logging road. Branches scraped the sides. The suspension slammed over ruts, and in the mirror, I saw flashlight beams jerking through the trees behind me. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more, and they had been close enough to almost grab me. I drove faster than I ever should have on that road. The truck fishtailed twice. I nearly clipped a tree on the first hard bend. I kept expecting another vehicle to appear ahead of me, blocking the road, but none did. About 10 minutes down, I finally got one weak bar of signal, and my phone started vibrating with delayed notifications. I called 911 with one hand shaking so badly. I could barely hold the phone. I told them there were multiple men around the cabin, that they'd tried to get in, and that they had chased me to the truck. The dispatcher kept asking for the address, but there wasn't really one to give. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station near the highway. The deputies found me there, About 40 minutes later, I expected them to treat me like I was overreacting. They didn't. That should tell you something. When they asked what happened, I gave them everything. The knocks, the footprints, the voices, the tapping at the window, the roof. One of them wrote everything down, without interrupting. The other asked me one question. That still sticks with me. He said, "Did they say anything else that stood out?" And I told him the truth. What bothered me most wasn't the threat. It was how comfortable they sounded. The deputies went back out to the cabin before sunrise. I didn't go. There was no amount of money on earth that would have gotten me back in that truck before daylight. By noon, I had answers I didn't want. There were fresh footprints all over the property, more than 3 people. They found cigarette butts in the trees behind the cabin, food wrappers tucked into brush, and a flattened patch of ground uphill from the side window, where someone had clearly been lying there, with a view inside. They also found marks on the wall beneath the loft, not random wear, boot scuffs, like somebody had used the siding for leverage. The loft window had pry marks around the frame, not enough to get it open, enough to show intent, and on the side of the cabin, below the window next to the bed, they found something that turned my stomach when my friend described it later. In the grime on the lower part of the glass, there was writing, just one line, made with a finger. It said, "We saw you first." I asked if they caught them. No, the area was too big, too wooded, too remote. Whoever they were, they moved fast, and they knew the terrain better than the police did. That was when my friend's uncle finally told me what he should have told me before I ever went out there. There had been incidents before, not exactly like mine, but close enough. A couple once heard people walking around outside after midnight and left before dawn. Another man claimed someone had stood outside the side window for almost an hour without moving. My friend's uncle himself had found muddy prints on the porch and what looked like a handprint high on the glass, as if someone tall had leaned in to look through it. He stopped staying there after hearing voices outside one winter night when the snow showed 3 separate sets of tracks circling the cabin. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every small noise outside my apartment pulled me awake. A branch against glass, footsteps in the hallway, a knock from a neighbor 2 doors down. Anything gentle was worse than anything loud. That's what people don't understand about this kind of fear. A scream is obvious, a bang is obvious, but the worst fear comes from sounds that feel controlled. A slow knock, a fingernail on glass, a voice outside your door, speaking softly enough to sound intimate. Once you hear something like that in the wrong place, you never hear normal silence the same way again. Months passed, and I tried to turn the whole thing into something I could live with. Trespassers, locals, drifters. Maybe a group of men who hunted illegally on that land and liked terrorizing anybody who showed up. That explanation worked better than the alternatives, until my friend called me again, about 6 months later. His uncle had gone back one last time, with 2 other men, to clear the cabin out before selling it. They removed the boards from the windows, opened the place up, and found the inside mostly untouched. Mostly. The chair near the side window had been moved, dragged directly in front of the glass, facing outward. But that wasn't the part that got me. The part that got me was the loft. On the mattress upstairs, in the dust, there was a clear outline of a body, not fresh enough to prove somebody had been there the night I ran, but recent enough that it hadn't been there for years. The dust was disturbed in the shape of shoulders, hips, legs, like someone had been lying there very still, watching the room below through the loft railing. When my friend told me that, I felt physically sick, because it meant there was a chance, maybe a very good chance, that somebody had been inside that cabin while I was too afraid to move. Maybe before I got there, maybe after I left, maybe while I was there, and just didn't know it. I asked if they found anything else. There was one more thing. Under the mattress, tucked between the wood slats, they found a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a note exactly, just a torn page from a hunting catalogue, with one sentence written across it in block letters. "Wait until he looks back." I remember sitting on my kitchen floor with the phone in my hand, staring at the wall for a long time after hearing that. Because that one sentence changed everything. It meant this wasn't random. It felt planned. It wasn't drunken trespassing. It wasn't one man trying to scare somebody in the woods. It sounded organized, planned, patient, like a game they had rules for, and somehow that was worse than outright violence. Violence is direct. This felt practiced. To this day, I still don't know exactly what they wanted. Maybe they wanted me to panic and run into the woods instead of toward the truck. Maybe they wanted me to open the door. Maybe they just wanted to see how long it would take before I broke. Or maybe they liked the feeling of owning the night around somebody else, of deciding when fear started and when it stopped. I still think about one detail, more than any other. Not the writing on the window, not the footsteps on the roof, not even the smile of the man behind the tree. It's the sentence the first voice said through the door. "I know you're awake." Because there's something deeply wrong about hearing a stranger speak to you with certainty, in a place where no stranger should exist. That sentence destroyed the last bit of safety I still had. If he knew I was awake, then he had been watching long enough to learn my movements. And if he knew enough to say it that calmly, then he knew fear would do the rest of the work for him. Sometimes people ask why I didn't go back with the deputies the next morning. I always tell them the same thing, because if I had seen one of those men standing in daylight, I think it would have been worse. Night lets you imagine monsters. Daylight forces you to accept that sometimes the monster is just a person who has had too much practice enjoying somebody else's terror. The cabin was eventually sold. I heard the sale fell through once, before it finally went through. I have no idea who owns it now. I've never wanted to know. I've never looked at the listing photos. I never went back, and I never will. But there's one last part I haven't mentioned. About a year after it happened, I was cleaning out the duffel bag I had taken to the cabin and found something in the side pocket that I know for a fact was not mine. A small strip of torn paper, folded twice, nothing on the outside. I opened it, expecting maybe an old receipt or a grocery list. Inside, written in the same blocky handwriting my friend described from the note under the mattress, were 4 words. "You didn't look back." I threw it away immediately, then went outside and dug it back out of the trash, because I needed to know. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't imagining it. The paper was real. The writing was real. And somehow, impossibly, it had ended up in a bag that stayed with me the whole drive home. I don't know when it was placed there. I don't know by who. And I don't know whether it was left in the cabin before I arrived or slipped into the truck while I was trying to escape. I've stopped trying to answer that part, Some answers only make your life smaller. What I do know is this: if you're ever alone in a cabin deep in the woods, and you hear 3 slow knocks on the door, leave everything. Because if they already know your name, they knew you were coming.